right, Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash. Double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone, who were well taught in this truth. Peace and salutations be to the Akim that's pushing the truth with all righteousness and sincerity. I'm the brother Yashar, Gabar, back to you again with another lesson, and Lord willing to be edifying unto the elect. All right? It's going to touch on, about grief, sorrow, all right, which comes with, being in this walk, man, learning who you are, the hell you're going to catch, all these things that you're going to have to face, all right, which, comes with, grief, all right, sorrow, all right, but, at Yahweh Shai, went through the same thing, people coming against you, and that comes with grief, man. Yahweh, like I said, Yahweh Shai, experienced the same thing. So, we're going to go through it too. All right. So, with that being said, start off with the book, Isaiah chapter 53, verse 1. It says, "Who have believed our report, and to whom the arm of the Lord revealed," and starting with, the elect, all right, who the Lord gives his strength into, all right, he revealed his strength into his, the elect, all right. So verse 2, it says, "For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of the dry ground. He have no form nor comeliness, and when he shall see him, there is no beauty that we shall desire him." All right, and it's speaking on what Yahweh Shai. All right, so let's continue on. It says, "He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrow, and acquainted with grief." Yeah, man, So yeah, Yahweh Shai, he was despised. He was rejected of men. All right. And he was a man of sorrows. All right. And this is what, we go through. All right. Being a man in this walk. All right. You're doing the work. All right. You're teaching. All right. And you're going to have to deal with, being despised, by what? Close people, family, relatives, all right, people of the world, all right, and that's, grief right there, man, that brings grief, all right, because what, Yahweh Shai, he wasn't, someone, just in his glory, all right. He came normal, normal man. All right, he wasn't just this, born into this, this as a king, pretty much, And his pops, was a carpenter, So when you seen them. People, you know how people are, man. You know how Jake is. They don't see you with this, just luxury lifestyle. All right. Riches, and they look down upon you. All right, they despise you. All right. So let's continue on. Let's bring it back. Verse 3, it says, "He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid as we our face from him. He was despised and was esteemed, and we esteemed him not." All right. So yeah. So this is what you're gonna face. All right, walking in the ways of the Lord. Because, a lot of, false prophets, they teach, prosperity. All right, but the true man of the Lord. All right, yeah, you're gonna deal with grief. All right, being despised. Not having riches here on this side. All right, because hey, that's of this world, man. You know, but what the kingdom that's to come. All right, then, all right, hey, the Lord, is going to show. All right, but here on this side, hey, hey, we don't care about none of the riches and all that bullshit, man. How people look at us as bums, and that's what comes with it. All right, once and the Lord has woken you up to who you are. All right, you walking in that righteous path. All right, hey, you're gonna have people, look at you funny, women leave you. All right, but that's what comes with it. The scriptures speak on about counting the cost. All right, so and that was the point. Yahweh Shai, he dealt with grief too, man. All right, the sorrows. All right, from the things he went through. All right, you got to think about it. Yahweh Shai, prophesying. All right, his own cup. All right, what he was going to go through. All right, knowing all right, the things that he was going to have to go through. All right, and that brings grief right there, man. All right, and through the Spirit, all right, we're doing the same thing. All right, we prophesying. All right, telling. All right, what we may have to go through. All right, the hell. All right, that you're going to catch. And what comes with this truth. All right, your woman leaving you. All right, your kids, family. All right, and that brings sorrow. So this is Revelation chapter 10, verse 10. It says, and I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it up, and it was in my mouth sweet as honey. And as soon as I had eaten it, my belly was bitter. Yeah, that book, all right, the scriptures, all right, and as he said, it was in his mouth sweet as honey, because what coming out of this world, and you learn who you are. All right, you learn, about the kingdom, and that brings, that's the pleasure, all right, of the scriptures right there, man. All right, that's the comfort. All right, you're excited. All right, then you learn more and more. All right, then what becomes bitter? All right, it becomes bitter, man. Knowing, hey, this the enemy, all right, ruling over you. All right, why we went into captivity. What the Lord went through. The prophets of old went through. What you may have to face. All right, and that's the bitterness, man. The things you have to accept, all right, being in this walk, that you have to endure through, all right, the trials, the tribulation, all right, the hell you're going to catch. Hey, that's the bitter, all right? So, yeah, that's what comes with it, and this is something either these false prophets ain't going to tell you, Like I said, prosperity doctrine, they don't talk about, the real, all right? Which is all the real, all right, but there's a balance, There's a balance, man. You can't, know what hot is if you don't know what cold is, or you can't know what cold is if you don't know what hot is. You know, so you have to experience both. All right. This is the book of Ecclesiastes. Uh, Look at that, man. All right, book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, verse 18. It says, "For in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth in knowledge increaseth in sorrows." All right, yeah, much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge, understanding of this truth. All right, the wisdom and knowledge of this truth. All right, what you increaseth in sorrows. Seeing Jake, all right, at his low, all right. All right, in the slums, the ghettos, and knowing why. All right, why, we in the predicament we in, all right? Why we went through the captivities, like I said earlier, you're learning who you are, learning what the Lord went through, so the knowledge of this truth, I bring sorrow. We ain't in the house of mirth, we ain't trying to live it up, make the best of this, All right, without this truth, man, hey, you're finished. All right, and that's why, we give praises, to Yahweh Hashem Yahweh Shai, man. That, he keeps the Holy Spirit in us. Because you've been crashed out, all right, without this truth, man. All right, you've probably been dead in jail somewhere, or being another nigga, all right, in this world. All right, without this, man. All right. So yeah, man. That's grief and sorrows, man. All right, for you. All right. Seeing Jake, ignoring, the despising. All right, hey, that brings, grief right there, man. And if you go into that word, matter of fact, you go back up. It says it was in my belly was bitter. Go to that word bitter. All right, I believe it means let's see, make you angry. All right, because it pisses you off too. Seeing Jake under the act, despising. Let me see, 10 to 10, bitter, on to the etymology. All right, let's go to the Strongs. It's bitter. Yep. So this is Strong's G. All right.
Strong's G 4087. Pekrino.
Render anger. All right. Render anger, man. So hey, it renders anger. All right. Now let's go back to Proverbs chapter 14, verse 13 in the NLT. It say laughter can conceal a heavy heart, but when the laughter ends, the grief remains. Yeah, so hey, laughter, conceals a sorrow heart. And only time you really get laughter, that mirth, being around brothers, man. All All right, being around the brotherhood, you know, someone, you know, that's in the same mind frame as you. You know, you can't get that, all right, with these people of the world. All right. All right, but you know, the laughter, you know, conceals, all right, the sorrow. But it says what? But when the laughter ends, the grief remains. You know, and you go right back to it. You know, all right. So what? Hey, this truth. You know, that's why this truth. Hey, this is the comfort. Because without it, hey, you just sorrows, man. All right. But it says, you know, let's bring it back. And Salakia, I'm still at the plantation. Let me see. Proverbs 14:13. Laughter can conceal a heavy heart, but when the laughter ends, the grief remains. All right. Yeah, the grief remains, man. You know, it doesn't go anywhere. All right. You know, and until you know, this place be destroyed. You know, until this place be destroyed, you know, ain't shit gonna change, man. All right, Salakia, let me do something right quick. Bear with me. So yeah, you know, hey, as the scripture says, you know, hey, the grief remains, you know. But you know, hey, this is why you know we seeking for the kingdom, because there ain't shit gonna you know change, man. All right, if this place goes on, all right, this place is gonna only get worse and worse. All right, working these bullshit jobs, you know. All right, that brings grief. All right, you know, having a child, can't raise them how you want, you know, can't take care of them how you want. Hey, that's grief right there, man. All right. So hey, this is why hey, we got to get the hell out of here. All right. Let's see what else we have. Okay, yeah, because earlier, you know, I mentioned, you know, about counting the costs. You know, counting the costs, man. You know, all right, knowing what, all right, this, you know, this truth is going to come with, you know. So it's the book of Luke, chapter 14. Start at verse, let me see, verse 27. It says, whosoever doeth not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Yeah, so, you know, whoever don't, you know, bear his cross, all right, accept either the trials, accept the hell, you know, and you can't be the Lord's disciple, all right, because hey, that's what's going to come with it, all right, you're going to be tried, you're going to be tested, you know. So verse 28, it says, for which of you attend to build a tower, sit not down first and count the cost, whether you have sufficient to finish it, you know. All right, and that's the point, you know. Count the cost, man. All right. You know, you're not gonna, you know, sit down, you know, and build a tower without, you know, really, you know, mapping it out. All right. You know, knowing if you're able to finish it, you know. Same way, you know, with this truth. All right. Yeah, you just can't, you know, jump in this thing. Yeah, you have to know what it's about. All right. You know, yeah, you have to, you know, eat the bitter. All right, take the bitter too, man. All right. your woman leaving you, all right, you catching hell, you know, people of the world despising you, all right, being in grief, being in sorrows, all right, hey, that's what comes with it. All right, you have to accept it, you know, you have to be willing, all right, to accept it, man. All right, bear the cross, all right, and continue on, all right, following the Lord. Whatever you're going through, man, all right, enduring until the end. You know, because we all catch hell, all right? Even these niggas of the world, all right, they're catching hell. All right, but we catching it on the right-hand side, all right, for the Lord's sake, all right? So, you know, hey, Lord willing, all right, hey, you brothers, you know, get the point, you know? Hey, Yahweh Shai went through it, all right, we're going to go through it too, man. All right, so, and we almost up out of here anyway, so, you know, Lord willing, all right, this video was edifying unto the elect, giving all praises, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Akakwadash, double honors unto the elders and apostles of Great Millstone. Till next time, say Shalom.